Our winning game says, what if we ignore all that and we look at what fulfills us? What do we really want if you strip all that away? If we said it didn't matter how we looked, what we drove, where we lived, but it was simply about what really brings us joy. Especially like if you have uncertainty around cash flow, like when there's not consistent cash flow coming in, or you're not sure where the next dollars are coming in, that could be a heavily concerning time that can disrupt your health because it's more like a chronic stress that runs in the background on a regular basis. Like it's not easy. Like when there's tech issues before a performance, it could be really draining and exhausting. And when Mondays are my days where I just do all my business meetings, and a couple of those meetings are with attorneys, and I'm dealing with contracts that I normally used to have a partner that dealt with that kind of stuff. So when it lands on my plate, I feel like I'm really intelligent when it comes to certain things, and where I don't feel as intelligent, like legalese is not my expertise, and definitely not Hollywood legalese. And so I've been, like working on copywriting my comedy special and work on a deal for distribution. And it becomes taxing, between that and then also attorneys getting involved and messing with my clients in a way that's outside of their zone of genius and their boundaries because they're starting to make financial advice and they're not financial advisors. It starts to wear me down. Like, I like to have some days off, but because I took a longer period of time off to hunt, I took a longer period of time off to go to Burning Man, and I also launched a book at the same time. Those types of things really impact me. So how do I handle that? One is I was tired this morning, but I did get up and do the sauna. Just 20 minutes, get a little sweat on. Then I take a cold shower and I get into the cold plunge. The cold plunge definitely wakes me up. I definitely dip my face in there when I feel like I'm lack of sleep or stress, that my face is more likely to be puffy because of the inflammation that comes with that stress. And I feel that helps me kind of release it. Then I do like 20 minutes of stretching. And so that's kind of my first hour of the day, is taking time to stretch. I'm in the cold plunge, and to distract myself, I'm answering YouTube comments, which this week have been overly negative. Like not a lot of people, just people that go watch like 10 videos and they're negative on every single one. And I'm like, yeah, like it usually doesn't bother me at all. I laugh about it. I usually make fun of myself. But starting the day that way is helpful, and then writing, like, what am I grateful for? What's the intent of the day? And what are the things I want to reinforce that are most important to me, so I remember who I am and what I stand for and what's really going on. So starting the day that way could be, extraordinarily helpful. If I could just eat meat, then it would be fine. I'm just like, when I'm stressed, like yesterday, I ate so much candy, it was just a breakdown emotionally. Like after having the barometric pressure drop while I was in Toronto, all my sinus pressure went to the front of my face. I wanted to record some of my audiobook, but I sound stuffed up right now. So like that kind of impacted me. I was in a lot of airports that had a lot of delays, and I had to end up sitting in middle seat on one of these planes. And like, these are privileged problems I get, but they just weigh down on my psyche. So I got to make sure, am I working out? I didn't quite eat properly, so what could I do to kind of deal with that? Well, intermittent fast, I'm going to get back on track. So today I had eggs and meat for breakfast, and what I'm finding is, like, what I would love to do is just go get some nicotine. I don't smoke, but you could take nicotine sprays, you could take, Hoppe. Like, I feel myself wanting to go for that because of the unease and the pain, but then I just have to realize, like, pain is part of the gift. It brings up the emotions that might be unprocessed. I felt a little bit sad this week. I feel best when I'm talking about these things, when I write about in Money Unmasked. But the thing is, I'm a human being that still has emotions and still has struggles, like coming home late on a Sunday, my energy was kind of depleted because I didn't have my normal routines where I might go for a walk with Carrie, or I might, get my workouts in, or I get my sauna and my cold plunge, or get my stretches in. Sometimes being on the road disrupts that. Plus, I drank the one night when I was in Vegas, and that disrupted my sleep. And so there's kind of this compounded effect of selling a business and then having a small business that has big opportunity and trying to keep up with that. So how do I deal with it is maybe go outside and walk barefoot and get a little bit of grounding and earthing that way. Drink more water. Get more sleep if at all possible. Like I've been going to bed a little bit earlier, but I'm also waking up a little bit earlier, and I'm trying to get myself to go back to sleep or at least meditate. And so I'm kind of working that, but it doesn't always cooperate, right? Movement. right? That stretching. I mean, it comes down to a lot of the basics that we've always learned all along: what we eat, what we drink, how much sleep we get, how much movement we have, and if we can just basically be out in the sun so we get some vitamin D. I'm thinking I have less vitamin D right now because I haven't been out in the sun, haven't had my shirt off out in the sun because the weather's gone down, and I'm not taking any vitamin D supplement. So it could be a compounded effect of all those things, but just because I write a book about money that has a lot to do about prosperity and feeling abundant doesn't mean that I don't have bouts of scarcity. That doesn't mean that I don't get off track. It's just I get on track a lot faster. Like in the past, I would be in these ebbs and flows where I'd be in such a flow state for months at a time, being so crazy productive. And then I would finally hit a wall because I was pushing too hard, or I wasn't creating that depth and harmony where I was taking time for relaxation, rejuvenation, get up to my cabin, because I'm trying to fit it all in. And that's kind of what happened after coming back from hunting is like from September 11th until today, I don't know that I've really had a day off. I am going to go to a concert on Saturday. I am going to take the day off with my wife and my sister and her husband on Sunday and just hang out at the cabin, which I think is much needed. But I find my old habits of being a striver where I think that work will solve all the problems. But if work leads to exhaustion or creates a deficiency in our health, or it starts to create like a level of grouchiness or disconnection because I don't feel like talking, which I normally like to talk things out, like I just find myself at a place where I have to course correct. You either course correct or you get forced into corrections. Forced corrections are surgeries, they're health breakdowns, they're organ failure, they're loss of relationships. There's fatigue that goes beyond where you just you start to lose a sense of hope. And so it has to be course correction along the way, which means creating a little bit of space, which means redefining timelines, which means recalculating priorities, which means designing a life that you don't want to retire from and examining the game that we're playing. And I'm saying in my game, what is it that I need to reduce and do less of? And part of it was just finding out what my flow is, how I create content so it doesn't take as much time, but how do I do that and still create the same amount of quality? How do I change some of the timelines for my book launch so I'm not overly stressed and constrained that I don't have time to take off and hang out with my son or whatever it might be? I can't think of another time, but it was just I had a meeting that went long. And by the time I got down there and I'm thinking about my next meeting I just wasn't in a place that I could handle. I couldn't be really present. Part of it is when you have a big vision, things get messy. I'm relying on independent contractors. I'm relying on other people keeping their word. And if it's more than what I can handle and be a steward over, then I have to look and re-examine, am I pushing the accelerator too hard? Am I expecting too much of other people? Am I being too nice and just lack of management? I need to be firm and loving, but at the same time create better parameters and guardrails. And so that's part of it. Is like sometimes I have to ask myself, why does it matter? Who really cares? I think a lot of people, I have a lot of knowledge to share, especially around this topic of money, and a lot of it's unique. I don't see it out there any other place. So there's a bit of stewardship there that also can feel like a burden, but I have to also recognize it's my job to live a great life first and foremost. It's my job to take care of my family first and foremost. And then I can bring that information to the world. But if I skip the step of taking care of myself and my health, and I skip the step of my family, then what ends up showing up in my life is guilt and shame. And guilt and shame is a burden that weighs down energy and doesn't allow me to be fully expressed. And then everything feels like effort. And I think a lot of people are forcing themselves and feel like they're an effort because that's what society wants them to believe. Sacrifice now for a better tomorrow. Sacrifice today because one day it'll all be better. Live a crappy life because one day you'll get to retire. This guy that's fighting with me on YouTube, I don't even know who he is. He's retired at 55. That's not an inspiring life. Great, you're retired at 55. You have a long life to live and you're just done with value creation. You can't find a purpose that serves other people and solves problems and adds value. We just don't share the values. So let him live his life the way he lives it, but also examine my life and say, what do I have to change and course correct so it doesn't become a bigger problem long term? Look, I've been a very curious person that always questions everything. Not because I'm a skeptic, but because I want to know how things work and how effective they are and how it came to be. And I learned this really from being indoctrinated as a kid of how things were by going to school. Here's an indoctrination. America's the best. America, right? And then I went to Korea and I was like, wait, these people are just as free as we are in South Korea and they're very nice people. So I do think America's an amazing place. I think I'm really glad that I live here. But at the same time, I started to question because I went to this movie in Korea and they showed this thing called aircon disease where this woman was using the air conditioner and then she got really sick, and when she turned it off and used the fan, then she wasn't sick anymore. But there were rolling blackouts because they were having energy issues. So was it really that people are getting sick from using an air conditioner, or was it they wanted people to reduce their energy usage and fear was the way that they wanted to do it? And so I thought, well, where are we being told this? Like for the first time, right? So I came home and I just didn't take anything at face value. I was going to school and I was like, I think that we lead better lives the better questions we ask. And I have a mentor that just got pancreatic cancer. They wanted to do chemo. He said no, left the hospital, even though they were advising him against it. And his numbers are now normal 2 months later. I just saw him in Dallas. It was super heavy, but he did other methodologies and, really asked so many questions. And the medical establishment, the people he talked to were mad he was asking the questions. He's like, wait, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm trained to ask questions. And so I just have asked a lot of questions over the years about how things work and what would prevent them from working and why they are the way they are. And it's very inconvenient for people, especially, in money, because when you ask and you learn, you find out that it's not what it seems. And look, some of the news was bad news for me. If I could just sell 401ks and get paid an asset under management fee for those 401ks, I would be worth tens of millions of dollars more today than I am. But when I realized it was deferring tax, not saving tax, when I realized that there were fees that were impacting the return substantially, when I realized that taxes could go up in the future and people are delaying their taxes so they can end up in an adverse tax situation, when I realized there's no cash flow with these plans and the tax savings that they think they have it isn't in their pocket, it's deferred in the plan that they eventually have to pay tax on, I started to be like, wow, this isn't what it was supposed to be. And yet 75 million Americans rely on that as part of their retirement plan. And then I started saying, well, why are we retiring? And I'm like, well, the industrial age, people had terrible jobs. Retirement was needed because people were working 7 days a week in assembly lines, and it was exhausting and it was breaking their body down, and they would retire and then they would only live for a couple of years because they had such a terrible life. We've had advancements in technology. We've moved to a more informational age and a more technological age, and yet we're still abiding by these old antiquated concepts. And unfortunately, as you know, people are living longer today, but sicker and longer, dependent upon pills to keep them alive, dependent upon help from other people because they're not healthy and vital, their vitality is low. And yet they're going to live their so-called golden ages by doing the things they never did while they were growing up or while they were at work, because that's when it's supposed to get better. So I just started to ask questions. It wasn't like I wanted these answers. It wasn't like I arrived to an answer and then I said, how do I design a plan that supports and validates my process? Because that wasn't the case. There's just much easier ways to make money than how I make money. It's harder to write a book and make money from writing a book than selling a financial product. And my wife used to say, too bad you couldn't just stick to selling insurance where there were renewals and it was easy for you to do, but I was also bored. So now I'm moving into is there a way to still be an intellectual property capitalist and be able to have organizations that I can get paid when people actually get services done the proper way? And so I'm just playing a different game now because it would help for recurring revenue and it would help to make sure it's designed properly. And as long as I don't hit bandwidth or too much, capacity issues, I'm just looking at it's all or nothing. I either do this or I do that. It's like curiosity is the key. And asking questions is a gateway to really understanding things. And when we look at the traditional methods, when I learned the food pyramid in college, I was like, really, the food pyramid? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And asking questions, but there was the indoctrination of this is what we've always been taught. Okay, low fat, high carb, low fat, right? So no fats for the brains, not any good fats. We're just calling all fats fats, and it's the tiny amount to have. Just fruits and vegetables, a whole bunch of carbs and a little bit of protein. Like, that food pyramid has been dismantled and shown that it was erroneous. So when I started reading Rob Wolf's work and I was like, wow, paleo makes a lot of sense, it worked for me in my life in most ways. Where it didn't, my wife said I was boring. She's like, you know what? I hate going to a restaurant. You're asking tons of questions. You're the obnoxious that can't just accept the food. You want to know what everything's cooked in and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, yeah, I think the body's resilient enough that I don't need to be that strict every single moment. And she also said I looked in the mirror too much, was getting too vain, and she doesn't really care, as you know, about that kind of stuff. She just wants me to be healthy. But there's a level of stress that comes with trying to be perfect. And unfortunately, The way that fitness has worked is that people go and they do their strip down where they're eating chicken and broccoli and they're only drinking water and they're working out multiple times and they do all this stuff to look shredded with their veins popping, and then they post pictures of that as if that's how they look every day, but then they go back to their normal life. Then we live up to this impossible standard and we don't choose to be fully happy about who we are because we don't look like that projected image that might even be photoshopped, that might be, bronze tanner that's involved in it, whatever it might be, because we think that that's what it takes to be loved. And sometimes it's just us loving ourselves for who we are. I still judge myself and my body, and when I'm more healthy versus less healthy. I see pictures when I was on carnivore versus now. I start to get in this comparison game. And the reality is I'm probably the only one that really cares. And it probably really doesn't matter all that much. But because somewhere along the line I thought it did, from the time I was a kid, and I saw people respect it or admire it or talk about it or be attracted to it, I said from the time I was a kid, I always want to make sure I take care of myself. But what take care of myself came from a rudimentary place in a very early developed brain that then becomes a permanent image that's impossible as like an Adonis complex. Like, I've never got to the point where I'm that shredded because it was so boring. It is so tedious. And I'm not a fitness instructor, and I'm not posting pictures to be like, look at me. I once got shredded in 2012. I put the pictures out online and my wife was like, what is this about? This isn't like a turn on to me. And then she's looking at the comments being like, is this really what you want to put out there? So that's the thing, is we have a lot of antiquated systems, we have a lot of antiquated beliefs, and we have to look at who's profiting from those beliefs and why there's people that are so avid to speak against anything you do, that their way is the best way to do it. And look, I think that there are some variances in blood type that can impact maybe what your food is and food intake and all that kind of stuff. But what I know for me and for my son Breck is the more meat we eat and the less carbs we have. But I think we have to kind of look at the trial and error and also what works for our lifestyle. Look, when I wrote Killing Sacred Cows, I had no idea where scarcity came from. I thought maybe it was like passed down through stories, which that is part of it, and even passed down through behaviors, which that might be part of it. But I really think a lot of our scarcity and our belief around money happens at a very early age, which is from our first memories of it. Was it a good memory? Was it a bad memory? Was it one that was scary? Was it one that was hurtful? Was it one that, we were told there's not enough, we can't afford it, like you're greedy, like whatever it is, when our mind hasn't even been developed, when we don't know how to deal with that information. Based upon dealing with money and addressing money and tackling all that, I thought that there might be something that could glean from going back to that early memory and find out, was it a positive or negative memory, or was it just simply like, what was your reaction to that thinking, and was it strong enough that you'd still remember it today? And so, if we go into the childhood work, we could find out where the stem of our belief systems are that serve us or harm us. This is a tough game in life because there's forces that work against our natural flow. And those forces come from societal norms. Society would have you believe, and look, even probably your parents or grandparents would have you believe, the more educated you are in the system, the more valuable you are to society. We still see, even though it's happening less and less, that to be a doctor or to be a lawyer means that you've made it, means that you are prestigious. We're starting to watch that break down in society because of results and because of insurance plans and because of the state of health of people. But this indoctrination is, the more we learn in books, the more smarter we are. But the problem is sometimes we just become really good at taking tests. And yes, we learn about all these topics in a very general sense, and yet the way that learning is happening now has changed because of the internet and because of, the early days of AI. And so what happens is people end up around money and around, these games going, I need to check the boxes that society tells me is important. The size of my house, the type of car that I drive, the degrees that I have, how nice the stuff I have in the house is, the clothes that I wear. There's all these check boxes society continually tries to get us to buy into. The keeping up with the Joneses, from what we see in Hollywood to what we watch on commercials to what we read about. It's this indoctrination of what societal norm is, and that our value is in our materials and our value is in our degrees. All these things external to us. Our winning game says, what if we ignore all that and we look at what fulfills us? What do we really want if you strip all that away? If we said it didn't matter how we looked, what we drove, where we lived, but it was simply about what really brings us joy. And most people see that as frivolous. That's what kids do. They think about things that are exciting and they dream big and they want to be astronauts or whatever it might be. That's kids' play. Now it's time to be an adult in the real world. Are you going to check these boxes and go up this ladder? And that's either playing not to lose because we're holding on to what we got, or playing to win because we're chasing something we don't have. Both forms of scarcity. But if we could say, what if we design a game worth playing? What if we design a life worth living? What if we design the life we don't want to retire from? And that game is something that we enjoy the process along the way, enjoy life along the way. Then we've actually found win in the work, not just in the outcome. Society wants you to get to outcomes. And once you have that outcome, you're valuable. Once you have that outcome, you're validated. I want you to get to the place where the work is the validation, because it's work that you enjoy, that you grow in, that you want to do for long periods of time, that you're not trying to get rid of, and that it's worth the difficulty, because work sometimes is difficult. Developing a skill set to write a book, developing a skill set to do comedy, developing a skill set to be articulate, that requires reps, that requires work, that requires coaching, that requires taking a leap on ourselves. Society wants you to leap into their arms and they're going to let you down. You got to leap into yourself and say, do you trust yourself to know what you truly want? Not what well-intentioned preachers, teachers, family, and friends think you should want. Not the box society created for you, which is more, bigger, better, faster. But where you say, this is how I want my days to go. This is how I want to invest in myself. This is the lifestyle I want to build now and in the future, not just one day, someday. And here's the work that's worth doing. That's the winning game. And I'm saying once you design the winning game, you've already won, because the game is the win, because you're playing at a level and in something that's fulfilling along the way. And it's worthwhile. So even when there's minutia, even when there's obstacles, you still move forward because your vision is bigger than the obstacle, because your vision is your win. And then value is how you deliver that vision. And then prosperity becomes kind of your state of being. And so vision is the win, value is the way, prosperity becomes your way of being, and dollars are the byproduct of that value. Look, sole purpose is something to be remembered. And what society wants us to think is something that we have to get to, that we have to do more work, get more indoctrinated, listen to another podcast, read another book, go to another event, go to school, have someone tell you. But like, it's all something that we have to be in silence enough to ask ourselves. We have to find a hobby where we lose track of time. We have to maybe meditate or do some writing or something, or go up in the woods and contemplate. People aren't comfortable being alone because we're addicted to the noise. The noise distracts us from our purpose. It hides our purpose. It buries it deep down because our purpose might be inconvenient. It might be scary. We might not know how to achieve it. But our sole purpose is who we are when we're at our very best, fully self-expressed. Not convenient to be like, I'm going to do comedy. Not convenient to say, I'm going to do a theatrical keynote. Not convenient to say, I want to write a children's book. These were all things that required co-creation and collaboration. It required coaching and developing skill sets. I just didn't walk out one day and it was all there. It was something that was developed over time. And for most people, that's a scary notion because they don't want to suck at something in order to get good. And so the first time I tried to act, it was awful. It was atrocious. It was terrible. And it was uncomfortable. But it's gotten better. My performance today was probably the better acting I've done, and so it's getting a lot more fun. There's a lot more dimensions to it. But we have to remember our sole purpose. I feel like it was born within us, but then we think it's outside of us, so we're chasing all of this stuff to try to find it. And a lot of that chasing is helpful because it's our road to don't. What don't you want? What don't you want to do? What's not working for you, right? That's the key. People are in death by committee. Hey, tell me what to do. Is this the right thing? I don't want to make a mistake. Is everyone going to accept this? Is everyone going to like this? And we spend so much time and energy trying to avoid mistakes. But mistakes are part of the process. Mistakes are part of the ingredients. It's part of how we learn. And if we spend so much time in angst trying to avoid it, we never really discover who we are. Like, if you're going to do something extraordinary, there's going to be missteps. But that's going to be part of the ingredients that creates the attention to new details, that creates the harvesting of a new lesson that you can now articulate, that creates the bandwidth to then know how to do it different, right? So I just think that so many people they don't want to be defined by their mistakes, but they're defined by their fear of their mistakes. I mean, we're human. To be human is to err, right? That's a bad paraphrase of Shakespeare. And yet we hide from our mistakes. We pretend that we don't make them, and people feel that. I feel like the people that are most admired in today's world, they're the most vulnerable, and they make mistakes, and they own up to it, and they acknowledge it. And the people who are trying to pretend like they've got everything figured out in every area of life, we know you don't. That's just not how it goes. You might be so superior in some areas and have a genius level there, and then in other areas be so lopsided. I remember watching on a flight this documentary of Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett, his wife was sick, and she's like, bring me something to throw up in. And he brought her a colander, right? So there's holes in it. Like, she's like, what are you doing? That's going to go everywhere. So he put a cookie sheet under it. Like, he just was so inept at like that area, and even in his relationship with his wife, right? She's like, he's a nice person, caring, but what he's really good at is allocating capital. And he's been really focused at allocating capital. And just because he's really good at that and has a lot of money doesn't mean that he's good at these other areas, right? I mean, we already know he supports Bill Gates, who's a total prick. It doesn't take long to find that out if you read just a couple things at the atrocities he's done on humanity in the name of philanthropy, right? So the thing is, like, we're going to make errors, we're going to make mistakes, and we just have to be willing to take steps forward and course correct. And the sooner that we can acknowledge it and have a few people that have our back that we could talk about it when we feel stuck or we get in a looping pattern, then we can get out of that sooner and learn the lesson versus try to hold it in and pretend, which just destroys energy. And people can it's like a stench that comes on you of scarcity as you try to pretend like everything's fine. Sometimes people ask how you're doing and they don't really want to know. Like this week when people are like, how you doing? I'm like, I've had better weeks, man. It's been a difficult one for sure. It's just, I've been pretty open about it, but it helps rather than pretending. We have a few excuses in life. I don't have the time. I don't have the money. I don't have the ability. All three of those excuses come when we try to do everything on our own. When we try to do too much by ourselves, we have constraint in those three areas. Part of it is a lot of us have the time, but we get really caught up in escapisms. My escapism is going to be I start watching some TV series late at night, or I start picking up the house and fix stuff that didn't matter, but I need to have that done in order to do the next thing, right? Like we find those escapisms that start to infringe upon our time. Or we're just not strategic with our time, and we say yes to everyone as a people pleaser, that it infringes on our time. Or we have too many things on our phone that are anyone's to-do list that comes into our inboxes. And so it's reclaiming your life and creating boundaries. It's tough because when people create really clear boundaries, they can seem calloused at times. You might even judge them, but the reality is they just know what they're up to, and somehow we're trying to project our agenda onto them. So you got to ask, is this worth my time? Is this representative of who I want to be and what I want to do and where I want to go? And don't let the world dictate that, but start to use your own force to clear a calendar to be consistent with who you are. And when we start to identify that properly, we recover time. We transcend time, because even doing a morning ritual, or even when you work out, the rest of the day is going to be more productive, even though you have less time. Each minute matters more because of the energy and the way that you show up with that. When you're overwhelmed, when I'm distracted, little things seem bigger than they are. I start spending more time worrying about what needs to get done than actually getting it done. That's what fatigue will do to us. That's what saying yes too often will do. And so, sometimes it's just saying not now, or I don't have bandwidth, or getting clear about what really matters and getting focused. So that's not easy for people to do because we want to be liked. And the more we want to be liked, the more we overcommit. The more we overcommit, the less health we have. The less health we have, the less energy there is. The less energy we have, the less bandwidth we have, the less clarity we have, the less energy for vision, the less quality of life, the less, it's a spiral. And most people are caught in that spiral, just trying to do things for other people while they silently and secretly resent them for saying yes. But they could have said no, and they just chose not to. the reason we chase money is because we're chasing love anyway. I mean, when it all comes down to, it's the most abundant resource on the planet. It's what people really want deep down. But we've heard too many rappers say that love and money are the same thing, or if you have money, then you get all the free love that you want, right? And all this kind of stuff. But I think it was Coco Chanel that said the best things in life are free, but the second best things are very, very expensive. And to me, that's a quote about love. Like, it's about love, and then outside of that, then it's about, luxuries. And, like, it would be great to fly private, and it's great to go to Michelin three-star restaurants, and it's great to, have the most luxurious beds and bedding and housing. Like, but that first thing is, as I think the question we all ask is, am I lovable? And we do all these actions trying to prove that we're lovable, and money becomes one of those false gods that we try to use to prove that we're lovable and valuable, but actually a lot of times pushes people away because it feels inauthentic, or it feels showy, or it feels like we're more concerned about showing them how valuable we are rather than seeing them for who they are. And when we haven't accepted ourselves, then we use money as our way to amplify what we hope people will see in us. And it actually becomes a blinder where it doesn't help us at being present, because it's a great companion. It's a great byproduct of value. It's just a terrible solo artist or a replacement for value, because when it becomes a replacement for value, then it's about deception and coercion. So in the end, it is all about love when it comes down to it. And why aren't more books talking about that around money? That's like the real issue here. Yeah, and we have our excuses. Like, I notice that when there's the most difficult things in my life, I want to be able to point out, but guess what? The real estate market was bad, or this thing happened with this client, or, I didn't know this was going to happen. Like, we like to blame because it's hard to take responsibility. And at the time, I wanted to blame that my partners had died, and that's why I was making these rational decisions of overworking and neglecting my family, because I felt like it was a justifiable excuse. But the thing is, it was at the expense of everything that mattered. And so my wife was just like, hey, you're an extraordinary businessman and an ordinary husband and father. Like, just straight up says it to me, right? And she was right, so I couldn't really argue, and I got emotional. And I remember, but what I had to do was not say anything and just take the action of working from home for the next 30 days, investing the time with her and my son, taking care of my health, taking time to sleep and recharge, showing that I was a valuable asset, not just do everything for everyone else, because a lot of other people were grieving, and I was just picking up the slack, and I was picking up the slack of partners that weren't there without processes and systems, and I was thinking I was doing the noble good deed. But the reality was, my partners never asked me to do that, and they wouldn't have wanted me to do that at the expense of my own health and my own family. But it took a moment like that to bring that to reality. It took someone holding up a mirror to me and saying, do you like what you see? Is this what you really want? Because let me tell you what it's like on our side. And so that really was a change in course, a change in trajectory for me. And I found my energy changed, my level of excitement changed, my health changed. I got back to being active. There was just a whole lot that came from that courage that she had to have that conversation with me.
Hey, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And if you're enjoying these videos, well, there's good news. More where that came from, so go ahead and click through and watch the next video now.